My name is Adrian Cole. I'm 29 years old, born and raised in Chicago, Illinois, a city where winter turns every street into a confession and every lit window looks like it's hiding a secret. This is the story I've never told anyone. I call it, she said, "Pretend you're my husband," in front of everyone. It began on a Thursday evening in early December in the polished, suffocating warmth of the Grand Marlowe Hotel downtown. Outside, snow was falling in soft white sheets over Michigan Avenue. Inside, everything gleamed. Crystal chandeliers, mirrored columns, women in silk dresses, men in expensive suits, the clink of champagne glasses, and the kind of laughter people use when they want to sound untroubled. I was only there because my firm had sent me. At the time, I worked as a financial risk consultant for a private investment group, which meant I spent my life identifying damage before it happened and then watching powerful people ignore me until the damage became expensive. My boss, Stephen Mercer, liked to say I had a trustworthy face and an inconvenient conscience. It was his version of praise. That night, our firm was hosting a joint holiday gala with one of our biggest clients, Vander Capital, a family-run empire wrapped in elegance and rumor. The Vander family had money old enough to feel untouchable. Hotels, real estate, private equity, political connections. People lowered their voices when they said their name, even in admiration. I had no interest in any of it. I was tired, overworked, and still carrying the weight of a phone call I hadn't answered from my younger sister, Nora, who only called me that late when something was wrong with our father. My father and I had perfected the art of loving each other badly. We spoke in practicalities, disappointments, and silences that stretched for months. So I stood near the back of the ballroom with a glass I wasn't drinking, scanning the room out of habit more than curiosity. And that's when I saw her. Elena Vander. I knew who she was before anyone said her name. Not because I followed society pages, I didn't, but because I'd seen her once before in a conference room 6 months earlier, seated at the far end of a long table, quiet while older men talked over each other. She had said almost nothing during that meeting, but when she did speak, everyone stopped. Not because she was loud, because she was precise. That night she wore a black dress with long sleeves and a clean, elegant cut that made her look less like she belonged to the room and more like the room belonged to her. Her dark hair was pinned back loosely, exposing the sharp line of her neck. She was beautiful, yes, but not in the soft, easy way people like to describe beautiful women. There was something watchful about her, controlled, as if she was holding the edges of herself together by force. She was speaking to an older couple near the stage when her eyes lifted and found mine across the crowd. It was a brief thing, maybe 2 seconds, but something in her expression changed. Not softened, tightened. Then she started walking toward me. I remember straightening without meaning to. I assumed she was headed somewhere else, towards someone behind me, but she stopped directly in front of me, close enough that I caught the faint scent of jasmine and winter air clinging to her. "Smile," she said quietly. I blinked. "What?" Her hand slipped around my arm. Her grip was steady, but I felt the tension in it like a pulse. Then, with the serene composure of someone stepping onto a stage she had been raised to survive, she turned toward the approaching crowd and said, warm enough for everyone nearby to hear, "There you are, darling. I've been looking everywhere for my husband." I stared at her. For half a second, the world seemed to lose sound. 3 people had just turned toward us. An older silver-haired man with a politician's smile, a glamorous woman in diamonds, and a younger man whose face hardened the moment he saw Elena touching me. Cameras from the event photographer flashed somewhere behind them. I leaned toward her without moving my lips. "What the hell are you doing?" "Saving both of us," she murmured back. "Pretend." Then she looked up at me with such convincing affection that even I nearly believed it. The silver-haired man reached us first. Richard Vander, patriarch. I recognized him immediately from business reports and magazine profiles. Beside him stood his wife, Celeste, elegant and unreadable. The younger man was Daniel Whitmore, heir to another old-money family, and, if the rumors in the office were true, Elena's almost fiancé. Richard smiled at me, but there was no warmth in it. "Elena," he said, "you failed to mention you'd married." I was waiting for the right moment. She replied smoothly, fingers tightening on my arm. "This is Adrian." I opened my mouth, but she was already looking at me, her eyes begging and warning at the same time. So I did the stupidest thing I've ever done. I played along. I extended my hand. Adrian Cole. Richard took it. His grip was dry and firm. And what is it you do, Adrian? I work in risk consulting. Daniel let out a short laugh. How romantic. Elena didn't look at him. Not everything worth choosing is dramatic, Daniel. That line landed like a knife slipped between ribs. Celeste glanced at her daughter sharply. Richard's smile thinned by almost nothing. Then Nora called again. My phone vibrated in my pocket, startling me. I silenced it without looking, but not before Elena noticed. Family emergency, she asked softly, and for the first time there was something real in her voice. Possibly. She held my gaze for a moment too long. Then we should keep this brief. But brief was not what happened. Richard insisted we join them for dinner in one of the hotel's private reception rooms. It was framed as courtesy and felt like interrogation. I could have refused. I should have refused. Instead, something about the panic Elena was hiding made refusal impossible. So I walked beside her past chandeliers and curious glances and the burn of Daniel Whitmore's stare into a smaller room where 6 people sat around a table set with candlelight and silverware so polished it reflected every nervous movement. Under the table, Elena's hand brushed mine once. Not tenderly, not romantically, desperately. And that was when I understood this wasn't some impulsive rebellion from a rich woman who wanted to shock her family. She was afraid. Deeply, quietly afraid. Dinner unfolded like a performance written by people who hated each other too much to be honest. Richard asked careful questions about my background. Celeste asked where I had gone to school in the tone people use when they are deciding whether your existence is offensive. Daniel smiled too often and drank too little. Elena, meanwhile, played her role with eerie perfection. She remembered details I had never told her, probably lifted from some private briefing note or from the meeting months ago. She touched my wrist at the right moments, finished my sentences, looked at me like I was the one safe thing in the room. And all the while, I could feel something terrible moving just under the surface. Then Richard placed his napkin beside his plate and said, almost pleasantly, "If my daughter has married without my blessing, I assumed there was a reason for the rush." The room stilled. Elena's spine straightened. Daniel looked at her with an expression that made my stomach turn. Not heartbreak, but possession interrupted. I felt her inhale beside me. Then she smiled, though her eyes had gone cold. "There was," she said. She turned to me, and for one impossible second, I had no idea what lie she was about to tell. "There was," she said. She turned to me, and for one impossible second, I had no idea what lie she was about to tell. Elena's fingers slipped into mine under the table, gripping hard enough that I felt the tremor in her hand. "We married because," she said calmly, "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed didn't feel like silence. It felt like a glass room cracking. Richard Vander didn't move at first. The candlelight flickered across his face, catching the faint tightening around his eyes. Celeste's lips parted slightly, the way someone reacts when a chessboard has suddenly flipped. Daniel Whitmore leaned back in his chair, slowly, his expression shifting from surprise to something darker. And every eye in the room turned to me. I had exactly half a second to react. So I did what instinct and stupidity told me to do. I squeezed Elena's hand. "Yes," I said quietly. The lie settled into the room like smoke. Celeste recovered first. "Elena," she said, her voice thin with disbelief, "you cannot possibly expect us to believe that you married a stranger without informing your family." "She didn't," I replied before Elena could answer. 6 months of risk consulting had trained me for moments like this, when people watched you closely enough to smell hesitation. "We met earlier this year during a financial review meeting," I continued. "We kept it private because Elena didn't want complications." Daniel let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Complications," he said. "Is that what we're calling it now?" His eyes moved between Elena and me like he was searching for cracks in glass. Elena didn't look at him. "I didn't tell anyone," she said evenly, "because I knew what would happen if I did." Richard's gaze sharpened. "Meaning?" She finally met her father's eyes. "You would try to control it." The words were quiet, but they landed with the weight of a hammer. For the first time since dinner began, Richard Vander's calm slipped slightly. "You're suggesting," he said slowly, "that your own father would interfere with your marriage." "I'm suggesting," Elena replied, "that you already tried." Daniel's chair scraped lightly against the floor. "That's ridiculous," he said. "Your father has done nothing but protect your future." My future, she repeated. Her laugh was soft, but there was something brittle in it. You mean the merger? And suddenly the room made sense. Not emotionally, strategically. The Vanders and Whitmores weren't just families, they were financial dynasties. If Elena married Daniel Whitmore, the merger between their companies would become permanent. Billions tied together by marriage. Elena wasn't a daughter in this equation. She was leverage. Richard's voice dropped lower. You are making a scene in front of a man who has nothing to do with our business. Elena's fingers tightened around mine again. He's my husband, she said, and something inside me shifted. Because until that moment, I had been acting. But now I understood the fear I had seen earlier in her eyes. This wasn't rebellion. This was escape. Daniel leaned forward slowly, resting his elbows on the table. You know what I think? He said, looking directly at me. I think you're lying. His gaze slid to Elena, and I think she panicked. I felt Elena's pulse racing through her hand. So let's test the story. He leaned back. When did you two get married? I didn't even blink. October, I said. Daniel smiled faintly. Where? Vancouver. Why Vancouver? I met his eyes evenly. Because Elena wanted somewhere quiet. Somewhere her family wouldn't interfere. The room went still again. Daniel's smile faded. Richard watched me with a long, evaluating stare. Then he said something that made the air colder. We will, of course, want to meet the lawyer who handled the marriage license. My heart thudded once. Elena's hand froze in mine. Because that wasn't a bluff. That was a trap. And Richard Vander was the kind of man who verified everything. Before either of us could respond, my phone vibrated again in my pocket. Nora. For the third time. Something in my chest tightened. Excuse me, I said quietly, standing. Richard didn't stop me. I stepped into the hallway outside the private dining room and answered the call. Nora. Her voice came through shaky. Adrian. Dad collapsed. The words hit like ice water. When? An hour ago. I'm at the hospital. I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes. Is he alive? Yes, but they don't know what's wrong yet. I'm coming. When I ended the call and turned back toward the door, Elena was standing there. She must have followed me. The confident socialite from the ballroom was gone. Up close, I could see the strain around her eyes, the exhaustion hidden under perfect makeup. You need to go, she said softly. My father. I heard. For a moment we just stood there in the quiet hallway. Then she said something that surprised me. You shouldn't have helped me. I let out a short breath. You didn't give me much choice. I did. Her voice dropped. You could have told the truth. Could you? She didn't answer. Down the hallway, I could hear the faint clink of glasses and voices from the ballroom. The world continuing. I'll handle them, she said finally. Go to your father. And when they find out the marriage license doesn't exist. Her eyes held mine. They won't. How? A small, tired smile touched her lips. Because tomorrow morning, she said, we're going to get legally married. My brain stalled. That's your solution? It's the only one that keeps them from destroying you. Destroying me? You don't understand my father yet. There was a heaviness in her voice that made my stomach tighten. If he decides you humiliated him tonight, she continued quietly, your career will disappear before sunrise. And marrying you fixes that. It makes you family. She said it like that was both protection and prison. I looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who had pulled a stranger into her war. You don't even know me, I said. Her eyes softened slightly. Neither do you. The elevator doors opened behind me with a quiet chime. I stepped backward into it. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she said something almost too quiet to hear. Adrian, if you walk away now, I'll understand. The doors began sliding closed. I watched her standing alone in the hallway. The strongest woman in the room and the most trapped. And the worst part? I already knew the answer. Because something about the fear in her eyes felt familiar. Like looking at someone drowning, when you knew exactly what drowning felt like. The elevator doors closed, and I realized that by this time tomorrow, I might actually be married to a woman whose life was far more dangerous than I had imagined. By the time the elevator reached the lobby, my heart was pounding harder than it had all night. Not because of Elena, because of my father. I stepped out into the cold Chicago air and called Nora again. Snow had started falling heavier now, coating the sidewalks in white silence. Which hospital? I asked. St. Mark's, she said. Adrian, the doctors think it was a stroke. The word landed like a stone in my chest. I'm on my way. The ride across the city felt unreal. Streetlights blurred through the snowfall, while my thoughts kept drifting back to Elena standing alone in that hallway. Her voice, the quiet desperation behind the confidence. But when I walked into the hospital and saw Nora sitting in the waiting room with red eyes and shaking hands, everything else faded. "How is he?" I asked. "They stabilized him," she said softly. "He's unconscious." For years, my father and I had spoken in careful, distant conversations about bills, repairs, work, never about feelings, never about the things that actually mattered. Yet when I saw him lying there in that hospital bed an hour later, tubes running from his arms, his strong voice replaced by a machine's steady beep, something inside me cracked. Life had a way of reminding you what was real and what wasn't. At 3 a.m, my phone buzzed. A message from Elena. "Are you okay?" I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. "He's alive." Her response came almost immediately. "I'm glad." Then another message. "You're free to walk away, Adrian." I meant what I said. I leaned back in the plastic hospital chair and closed my eyes. The strange thing about the night wasn't the lie, or the fake marriage. It was that somewhere between the ballroom and the hallway, Elena Vander had stopped feeling like a stranger. She felt like someone standing at the edge of the same storm. I typed slowly, "Meet me tomorrow morning." The courthouse opened at 9. Elena arrived exactly at 8:55. She wore a simple gray coat and had her hair tied back, nothing like the elegant woman from the gala. For the first time since I met her, she looked human, tired, nervous. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she asked quietly, "How's your father?" "He'll live." Relief softened her expression. "You don't have to do this," she said again. "I know." Snow drifted lightly around us as people walked past the courthouse doors. Finally, she asked the question hanging between us. "Why are you here?" I thought about my father in that hospital bed, about how fragile life really was, about the years wasted pretending emotions didn't exist. Then I looked at her. "Because last night," I said, "you were the most honest person in a room full of liars." Her eyes widened slightly. "And because," I added with a faint smile, "I'm a risk consultant. Sometimes the biggest risks are the ones worth taking." For the first time since I met her, Elena laughed softly. Not the polished social laugh from the gala, a real one. Inside the courthouse, the ceremony lasted less than 5 minutes. No music, no family, just 2 signatures and a quiet promise spoken under fluorescent lights. When it was over, we stepped back outside into the cold morning air. She looked at the ring on her finger like she still couldn't believe it. "You just changed your entire life," she said. "Maybe." I shrugged slightly. "Or maybe I just started it." She studied me for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, she slipped her hand into mine, not desperately this time, gently. And in that moment, I understood something I had spent years ignoring. Life rarely gives you perfect beginnings. Sometimes it gives you chaos, fear, and impossible choices. But every once in a while, the most unexpected story becomes the one that saves you. And that's the strange truth about love. Sometimes it begins with a lie told in front of everyone, and becomes the most honest thing you've ever lived.